Welcome back. Today I want to share a very small summary and opinion, history and lore of one of the most relevant civil rebellions in the Imperium, born from the very center of the Imperium power from one of its more loyal servants. After not being heard or helped, after feeling there was no help coming, he chose to rebel, just like Horus did millennia ago. The biggest rebellion since the heresy, the Badab War. The Badab War was one of the biggest civil conflicts within the Imperium after the Horus heresy. It all started when the chapter master of the Space Marine chapter Astral Claws, Luft Huron, appointed himself as planetary governor of Badab and tyrant of Badab, no less. With the promise of protection, he took over all of the Badab sector. So far, so normal, right? Similar to Ultramar and their Ultramarine rule. But the behavior of Luft Huron became worrisome to Imperial authorities. The fact that he took over political power in the planet was not really a problem to the High Lords of Terra, as they themselves created the Astral Claws. The problem started when he started to protect the Maelstrom Zone. Huron started doing two things that began to brew what would be known as the Badab Succession War. First, he withheld the gene seed tithe to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Inquisitorial reports say that he started hoarding Imperial resources because Huron had requested a crusade on the Badab sector and his pleas for Imperial aid had gone unanswered. The second was when Huron stopped paying the Imperium tithes for the entire sector. But not only was he creating doubt on their gene purity, not paying Imperial taxes on the entire sector, he started blocking trade routes for the entire sector. Huron, of course, claimed it was for security reasons. However, all that said, even though Huron did not give the gene seed of the Astral Claws to the Adeptus Mechanicus for testing, to corroborate its purity and the lack of chaos tint, and withholding the tithes and taxes for the entire Badab sector, the actual problem started to unfold once the middle managers of the Imperium tithe collection hierarchy started to complain. The Carthagos sector administrators, whose duty is to collect tithes and distribute them, their cause of concern was valid, as once this gets up to the administratum, the first who would feel their rage would be them. What happened after? Well, if you don't pay your taxes, someone comes knocking at your door to collect, since the beginning of time. An Imperium tithe fleet warped into the Badab sector, consisting of several Adeptus Mechanicus Magos Biologis ships, Imperial cruisers, and Carthagos trade vessels. They all came to collect. The Magos Biologists wanted to collect the Astral Claws gene seed to test, as Huron simply stopped giving it. The tithe fleet requests hailing Imperial authority in them, and as they were unheard and dismissed, they warped into the Badab system, where they fired upon and destroyed. Details of this event are not yet revealed. The High Lords after this, after knowing of the hostile actions taken by Huron, dispatched two punishment fleets that disappeared into the Maelstrom Zone, never to be seen again. Let's stop for a moment our tale to give context. What is the Maelstrom Zone? Officially designated as an Imperial Resource Extraction Zone grid, this is a vast region of space within the Ultima Segmentum containing many sectors. The Maelstrom Zone itself is a region which is plagued by many warp storms, as its systems lay closer to the warp storms, from which many threats spawn to attack the Imperium. Could be Orc warbands, Elder pirates, and heretic traitors. This is the setting for the Badab War. Now let's continue. After incredibly huge acts of war against the Imperium, meaning the attack and destruction of the tithe fleet, and then the destruction of the punitive punishment fleets, not once, but twice, Huron called a conclave of all the Space Marine chapters tasked as Wardens of the Maelstrom. The Lamenters and the Mantis Warrior chapters came to the conclave. There, Huron presented them with the Articles of Just Succession, as he put it. Somewhat, one could say, a declaration of independence, as this intention, now brought down to a political level, was to separate and become independent, making the entire Maelstrom Zone independent, cutting ties with all neighbouring sectors. The trade lords of Carthos, the Carthagins, the middlemen and people tasked with tithe and tax collection and distribution were still monitoring these events and saw this for what it was, a very dangerous meeting and declaration that could very well threaten the entire Imperium as a whole, and they began to complain to the very complex and administrative nightmare that is the Imperium of Man. They complained to Ryzen Naval Command, they complained to the Segmentum Command's Procurator General, and eventually to the Firehawk Space Marines chapter. But after all of this, the only ones still willing to get involved were the Administratum, as the tithes were still not being paid. After a while from receiving the complaints and the desperate calls for help from the Carthagins, the Firehawks chapter decided to investigate the disappearance of the punishment fleets sent by the High Lords of Terror to the Maelstrom. They deployed in force, the entire chapter. The Firehawks' main battle barge, the Red Harbinger, entered the cluster protected by the Firehawks, the Endymion cluster. Please bear in mind that this happens after the Mantis warriors met in conclave with Huron for the succession of the sector, which, of course, the Firehawks have not yet confirmed. The Mantis warriors demanded the Firehawks to stand down, and they of course didn't. And when the Mantis warriors responded by attacking the Firehawks' fleets and boarding the Red Harbinger, the Badab War truly started, as the Staris versus the Staris fights had begun on this day. The Firehawks engaged the Mantis warriors, but even deployed in full chapter force, they had many problems with the elusive combat doctrine of the Mantis warriors. The first notable contact engagement took place on the planet Ibis, home of the Mantis warriors. But instead, the Mantis warriors and the Astral Claws had deployed to seize the planet resources in the planet Sagan III. The Firehawks arrived and decided to firebomb the entire planet of Ibis. The first notable combat engagement took place on the planet Ibis, home of the Mantis warriors. But instead, the Mantis warriors and the Astral Claws had deployed to seize the planet resources in the planet Sagan III. The Firehawks arrived and decided to firebomb the entire planet of Ibis and destroy the main battlecruiser of the Maelstrom battle fleet, the Sacred Tetrarch. While all this was happening, the Firehawks had given many calls for aid to any Imperial forces. This was first answered by the Marines Errant chapter, that when they arrived actually didn't have any impact as they decided to prioritize trade routes in the middle of a battle zone, and also was almost completely useless as the Marines Errant refused to fight the Lamenters, now a full renegade and traitor Space Marine chapter. Why? Because they had an honor pact with them, as they had shared many battlefields. But being useless doesn't mean immune to harm, as renegades kept getting reinforcements. One of Huron's calls for aid with the arrival of the Executioners chapter, now traitors, that were blood sword in the aid of the Astral Claws. In the end of a solar year, the Marines Errant were almost exterminated. Now, after all this has happened, after all the death and treason of monumental proportions, now the High Lords take notice that this is happening in an entire galactic sector, dispatched a task force from the Segmentum Solar with Inquisitors to investigate why is the fighting going on. And upon their arrival, they demand a ceasefire and the absolute surrender of the Successionists. Guess what was going to happen next? Of course, this didn't happen. And then they demanded the arrest of the Successionist. Also didn't happen. This is one of the rare occasions where one can criticize the Imperium for being naive. The task force, now with a full clear picture of the situation, morphed into a retribution force and started to muster forces to end this conflict. There were many loyal Space Marine chapters that answered the call and joined the Retribution Force. Some of these were the Red Scorpions, the Raptors, the Salamanders, and the Fire Angels. When the Retribution Force arrived in the sector, they ordered the Firehawks and the Marines Errant to surrender themselves to questioning to the Inquisition and to terminate all operations until further ordered by High Command. The appointed commander of the Retribution Force was Ortus, an officer from the Red Scorpions. a chapter closely bound and highly trusted by the Inquisition. This war started its next phase in several naval engagements between the Imperial Task Force and the renegade traitor successionists. First in the Battle of Silent Reach, when the Loyalists' fleet met the Lamenters and Battlefleet Maelstrom. A big naval battle with no clear winner, as both forces withdrew as they never got the tactical advantage. New reinforcements arrived in the form of the Nova Marines, that, alongside the Errant Marines, attacked a critical world called Viana, where they were engaged by the traitor Imperial Guard and Planetary Defense Forces, now turned renegade traitor and in service to Huron, the tyrant of Badab. The combined Loyalist Space Marine force almost completely disseminated this force, but nevertheless were unable to achieve its objective. The war escalated in intensity and the battle zone became bigger, because at this point, the executioners had arrived. As they were the sword to the Astral Claws, they immediately attacked the Loyalists and the new arrival of the Minotaur's Space Marine chapter, though when they arrived, they attacked everyone at the same time, as they were unsure where Loyalists were. But after the Battle of Viana, when the Minotaurs dropped and encouraged the Marines Errant and the Firehawks, or what was left of them, they knew what side was the loyal one. Then, all of a sudden, in the middle of a sector-wide civil war of almost heresy proportions, Luft Huron and his magnanimous role as Tyrant of Badab called for a parley with the Imperial commander. In this case, it was Ortis of the Red Scorpions. Huron, Ortis, and the chapter master of the Mantis Warriors met on a space station in the planet Shadim in the Grief system. No details are clear here, but Commander Ortis and the chapter master of the Mantis Warriors were killed by some chaos entity. This will forever be known as the Betrayal at Grief. The death of Ortis, the Imperial commander, did nothing but increase the rage of the Loyalists, who continued to receive reinforcements, as the Howling Griffins and the Sons of Medusa chapters had arrived. The Red Scorpions now elevated Karab Cullen to chapter master, and he was appointed overall commander of the Imperial Task Force, and he went right to work by relocating his resources and issuing more efficient orders and tasks in order to secure trade routes and strategic points. This solar year of the war ends when the heretic traitor chapter of the Lamenters attacked the remaining Firehawks, and the Lamenters suffered heavy losses. This boosted morale all over the Retribution force. After many battles, an Astral Claw Space Marine was captured and questioned by Inquisitorial forces. It was an apothecary, delivering crucial information that he was actually from the Tiger Claws chapter. This started to fill in the blanks in the investigation as to why Huron stopped giving the gene tithe to the Mechanicus. The goal of Huron is revealed to be that he was using cursed gene seed to create more Space Marines. The alarms now started to sound as loud as they can possibly be. More information was revealed as the traitor forces had now directly allied with Chaos Heretics to obtain cursed technology for the Space Marine creation, weapons, and everything they needed. Shortly after this, a massive battle took place in Signax, as this was a logistical bulwark for the traitors. For the Loyalist attack force, it was the Red Scorpions, Fire Angels, Salamanders, Raptors, and Nova Marines. The Astral Claws were on the back foot, but will not yield and detonated a lethal virus bomb. This didn't work. A key Imperial victory as the central hub for production and distribution of weapons, ammo, and vehicles for Huron had been lost. After this great Imperial victory, Inquisitorial Command ordered the Nova Marines, the Raptors, and the Howling Griffins to withdraw, in order to regain strength as they will be redeployed to face a huge Org Wark that was growing within the Segmentum Solar. Funny enough, they tried to dismiss the Salamanders as well, but the Salamanders simply refused the order, as they only answered to their duties and the Emperor, and the work in Badab is far from complete. The final two engagements of this solar year within the war were the destruction of the heretic Lamenters and the Minotaurs attacked by their main battle barge, forcing them to its defense. There, the Minotaurs massacred the traitor Lantern Marines to mostly nothing. Only ones left were severely wounded. Some prisoners managed to escape. The end of the Lamenters is to forever be known as traitors. This was their end. The other was the attack by the Loyalists on the Angstrom Forge world, reducing to nothing the materials, guns, ammo, and vehicles for the Astral Claws. With the traitors now on the run, they almost all chose to escape and dig into the Badab system. Within the system, the Imperial Command had decided to take the worlds one by one, and the first to fall was Gallon 6, with dire casualties, but a victory to the Imperium nobody could deny. This also was the year of the arrival to the battle zone of the Kakaridan Space Marine chapter. Their arrival was dark and quiet, in a whisper that said death. Their faces pale white with scales, faces covered in tattoos, and skulls from every Xeno and beast imaginable adorning their power armor. "Hail the Emperor," they said in a whisper everyone could hear. Chapter Master Tiberius offered his respect, services, and credentials to Commander Combe, which took them with great caution, and he tasked them to attack the planets of the Endymium cluster. This mission was taken happily, so to say, by the Kakaridans that straight away proceeded to unleash a campaign of complete terror, destroying entire planets and almost erasing completely the Mantis warriors from the map. The final battle was as the traitors made their way to their final stronghold, the Astral Claw's home, called the Palace of Thorns, in the planet of Badab. It would all end here. The newly arrived Star Phantom attacked via drop pool alongside Thunderhawks. A battle between loyalists and traitors of more than 500 Space Marines. Fights in this scale were not seen for millennia after the Horus heresy. While this was happening, elite drop troops disabled and destroyed all defences for the Palace of Thorns, putting the traitors on the retreat once more. At this moment, Captain Androcles of the Star Phantoms confronted and challenged the leader of the traitors, the heretic, the tyrant of Badab himself, Huron. Captain Androcles won, and Huron was almost dead when the remaining Astral Claws took him away. Huron would then completely turn to chaos and will merge with the remaining traitor Space Marines, which were the Lamenters, Mantis Warriors, Executioners, and Astral Claws, into the Red Corsairs, and himself as Huron Blackheart, a servant of the Chaos Gods, now a roaming band of pirates in the Maelstrom. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Tell me what you think and what your opinion is on what happened on Badab. Don't forget to subscribe. Keep the light of the Emperor burning. See you in the next one.